Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this Textile Talk podcast. I'm Gail Cowley, and I'll be your host today. Joining me is Anne Kelly. Just to give you a little bit of background before we start our chat, UK-based textile artist Anne Kelly is an award-winning artist, author, and tutor. Her multi-layered and densely stitched textiles have been described as small worlds. Trained in Canada and at Goldsmiths College in London, she creates wall hangings and objects using a mixture of mixed media collage and hand and machine embroidery. Her inspirations are taken from travel, memory, nature, and especially folk art. Anne tutors and teaches fine art and textiles to a variety of groups in the UK and abroad. And she is a member of the Embroiderers Guild UK, the Crafts Council Directory, and the Society for Embroidered Work. She also exhibits and curates group exhibitions nationally and internationally. Her 4 books for Batsfords are widely collected and studied by students of all ages around the world. So, Anne, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Gail. It's lovely to be here.
I wonder if the first thing that I could do is ask if you could just tell us more about yourself, your background, and how you came to stitched art.
Right. Well, you probably picked up the accent a little bit. I'm from Canada originally, but I've been here for 40 years. I trained as a fine artist in Canada, and then when I got my degree, I also received a travel grant from the Green Shields Foundation, which is a foundation that supports young artists, once they've finished their training, to travel with. It wasn't enough to live on. So I came to the UK and I worked as well as doing my own work. And then I did further training at Goldsmiths College a few years later. So that's my background. I'd always stitched from an early age, and I think if I'd grown up in the UK, I probably would have done a textile degree. But in Canada in those days, it wasn't really an option. So I did fine art, and I don't regret having done it, but I think we're very lucky in the UK because there's so many places that you can train and do wonderful degrees in textiles.
Yes, and it's not like that in Canada.
No, not the same, because it's a much smaller country and it doesn't have the same tradition of art education. It's got some brilliant universities and wonderful, artists and things, but they don't have the sort of historical background in textiles that we do here.
Mm. So where did your original interest come from? Did your mum or grandma sew? Or?
My grandmother was the one really who did everything. She did lace, she did patchwork, she did rug hooking, she did embroidery, absolutely everything. And my mother was really supportive. She sent me on a patchwork course when I was I think I was a teenager, because I used to get really bored in the summers and not know what to do. And I was in the class with much older people, but I really loved it. And when I came back, I kind of grabbed her old Singer sewing machine, and that was it. I was hooked. And I think even when I was at uni, I was sewing all the time, but it just wasn't considered part of traditional fine art training, if you know what I mean. But having said that, I used in my final collection for university, I used sewing. So it was always an element there.
And as far as the first memory of stitching,
Yeah.
who was it that actually first taught you to pick up a needle?
I think it was probably my mum. And I think it was making dolls' clothes or clothes for a teddy or something like that. And we used to have those doll weaving things. I don't know if you know those peg doll things. I don't know if you remember those with the little nails on them or something.
Oh, yes.
Not I
I
can't remember what
do.
they're called. But I
Oh,
mean, not particularly safe, I suppose, but fun, because you made like a long snaky type,
yes.
almost crocheted little bit of, or knitted sort of bit. Yeah.
I think they were a way of keeping children quiet,
Well,
because didn't they
absolutely.
take a long time? I
Mm.
think I had a homemade one that was made out of a bobbin,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
a cotton.
absolutely.
And I remember looking up the central hole thinking, that thing's never going to come out.
Because it takes so long to make it.
It does.
Yeah.
It really does. And of course, at that age, patience isn't usually one
No.
of the finest
No.
qualities, is it?
No. Absolutely.
So I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about where you look for inspiration when you're undertaking a piece.
Right. So for me, I think I've always been inspired by textiles. I love looking at vintage old textiles, not anything necessarily particularly precious, but just things that have even fragments of things that have something on them, some stitch or some print on them. And I'm very lucky that people give me lots of old bits of fabric. I also look for them at, when I'm in France especially, but at sort of secondhand shops and charity shops and things like that. And so that for me, that is almost equal to the sort of ideas that come from being asked, if you're asked to do something, if I'm commissioned or whether I'm working towards an exhibition, that will determine what I'm working on as well. I keep sketchbooks, but not as I don't work religiously from them. I sort of keep them almost like pin boards or, you know, memory mood boards, things like that. Just of things that I like that inspire me, and that's another way that I find inspiration. I also love seeing exhibitions, and I love looking at books that for all kinds of artwork too.
Because you have exhibited very widely, haven't you?
Yes, yeah, I've been very fortunate to have worked and exhibit all over the place, really.
And is travel part of the package for you, that it's somewhere that you really enjoy and want to visit?
I think it's more that, if people want me to come and visit, it's a great opportunity to see somewhere different. I've taught in New Zealand and Australia, and I've been to India a few times and North America. And it's just really nice to work with different people because you find that even though, they may come from a different country, stitchy people have a love of textiles and a love of stitch in common. So it always unites us really wherever we go.
Do you usually stay in hotels when you go, or can you often manage to find somebody with similar interests that will be happy to put you up
So
there?
it's a really lovely mix, actually. I think if you had to stay with people all the time, it's quite exhausting because naturally they want to, get to know you and show you their world, and that's wonderful,
Yeah.
and I love doing that. But sometimes if you're doing a lot of teaching, you need a break, so staying in a hotel is a nice option sometimes too. So it's a good mix of the two, really. But I think
Mm.
unless you stay with people, you don't really get to see the country because it's very different going in as a tourist and not really knowing where to go. So I'm so lucky. I've stayed with some really lovely people in this
Yes.
country and abroad. So very fortunate.
Now, I know myself what a difference it makes, because I've been over to New Zealand to teach
Yes.
and
Yeah.
stayed with some of our students for a
Yes.
little while. And it's lovely because you get that really personal introduction to a country, don't you, in a way you
Yes.
couldn't otherwise.
No, that's right. Absolutely.
As far as your training is concerned, 'cause I know that's where we started,
Yes.
um, as someone that trained at art college and also at Goldsmiths College, how much of that do you put down to your current success? How much of a part do you think it had to play?
I think it's really important. And I think I would go so far as to say I think that if you don't have any training, you really are limited in what you can do because it doesn't really matter what the training is, where the training is, as long as you get something, you get the basics, so you get the knowledge of what you're doing, but you're also able to look at your work critically and place it in a sort of, if you like, you can place it in a sort of tradition or see that you're working towards something. I think if you just do it on your own, it's very, very hard. And I know some people are very successful and haven't had any training, but I think it's more to the tutoring part of it that I feel is really important to have training for, because you have to understand what teaching is about and what students want from you. And that's not something you can get off the internet. You have to, that does take time, and you do need to understand what teaching is about. I do feel really strongly about it, because I think especially since COVID, there have been a lot of people starting up, and I wish everybody well, obviously, but the people that have got training and have got a background in fine art or in textiles, you can tell they're just, you get more for your money, I'd say.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think people have that history and that background of, understanding art history, understanding textile history. And as I said, they understand where they fit in. And I think that's really important, because it's not just a question of doing something that looks good. It's really understanding the whole picture. I also think from a teaching perspective, I was talking to my students about this recently, actually. Just because you're an amazing textile artist does not make you a brilliant tutor. It's a different skill set, And
Mm.
I think I'm fortunate to have had training in tutoring as well. And I think it really helps, because you can really understand and try and work towards what your students need, rather than sort of having them copy what you do, because that's not really beneficial for them. I think
Yeah.
on one level it might be, but really as a tutor, you always want your students to succeed for themselves. And that takes a lot of understanding, preparation. I think being a good tutor does take a lot of time and energy. And being a tutor, as you know, on show is hard work, because you have to be on your best game all the time.
You do. And I think whenever I finished a class, came
Yes.
out, I don't do face-to-face teaching now, but when
No.
I did, I spent many years doing it.
Yes.
And when I did, I always came out feeling as though I'd run a marathon. I'm really
Absolutely.
quite
Absolutely.
exhausted.
It is exhausting, and it's because it's very physical, but also it's quite emotional. I think people want something, a good tutor will give themselves a lot too, and they'll give the students something to really grasp and take away, and memory, a memory that they're never going to use everything that you give them, because everybody's different. Everybody will pick and choose what they want from what you give them. But if they take something away and use it, then I think you've done your job.
Mm. I think the format of the class makes quite a difference as
Yes,
well. Um,
absolutely.
if everyone is doing if they're doing a project, for
Yeah,
they're all roughly doing the same thing at the same
yeah,
time, it's so much easier because you can stop, you can show a process, and then
yeah,
everyone moves on. But I used to take a lot of City and Guilds classes where
yes,
people were, it was mixed. They were working on one person was working on one thing, one person was working on something different. I always found that very hard because it's the sort of mental adjustment in
yes.
between students, isn't it?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And also, people learn in different ways. We're just starting to learn about that, but something that might work for one student won't work for another. So you have to be open to showing them different ways of doing things, rather than just one size fits all. And if you're teaching, I often have groups of 15. That's a lot of different ways to teach people. So
Mm.
yeah, I think to go back to your original question, I think training is really important. So I'd encourage anybody who's thinking of doing this to really get as much training as you can, because you won't regret it.
No, I know that somebody that taught me when I was doing it was City and Guilds diploma,
Yes.
and she always said that she taught us, but she said that she used to go on a lot of different classes and workshops,
Yeah.
and she always said that no matter how simple they were, she always came back with at least one new idea.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Absolutely.
true, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are very few things, even if you think you've done this technique before and you could almost take it the class yourself, so to
Yeah.
speak, you still always come back with at least one new idea that you can put into practice.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah, so as somebody who has exhibited all around the UK and the world, can you give us some insights into the process of getting work into a gallery? and obtaining professional representation for your work. I know that a lot of our students and listeners, it's something that when they finish a course with us, they are thinking about. It's in their mind. So any advice you have would be much appreciated.
So I think, first of all, the internet is a great thing, because when I graduated from uni, if you were an artist, you had to take your work physically around to galleries to show them. And, that was quite exhausting and quite depressing, because a lot of galleries just didn't want to look at your work when you arrived on their doorstep. So it's a completely different world now. And I think you can send submissions to things. I think my advice for somebody starting out is apply for every opportunity that comes up, because you're going to be rejected. But, from maybe 70, 80, 90% of them will reject you, but you will get some. And the thing is not to be downhearted or depressed about it, because that's, if any, every artist, anybody who works in the arts, if they say they never have a bad day, they're not telling the truth, because everybody has good and bad days. And the main thing is to keep going and not let it get to you. And it can be, discouraging sometimes, but you need to really up the volume when you're starting out, because you're competing against a huge range of people. You don't see them, but there are lots of people like you who are starting out. There's some really good organizations for textile artists and artists that you can find online, like, textileartist.org, Fiber Arts, Take Two. There's some, and the School of Stitched Textiles, brilliant, who show you lots of different artists and mention where galleries have, where they've shown at galleries. So you can follow those up. There's also things like Axis Web, which is an arts organization, not a textile one, but they show textile artists. And they have a newsletter you can subscribe to. You can also get insurance from them for exhibiting, which is really good. So, you need to reach out. You need to go to exhibitions as well. I think that's something that I've found, especially since COVID. I think we missed out a lot during COVID, didn't we? We didn't get to see people. And you have to be someone who goes out and talks to people, because that's how things happen. They don't just happen on email. It's brilliant. The internet's brilliant, but there's nothing like actually seeing someone and someone seeing your work. And often people will say to me, they'll see my work and they'll say, "Oh my goodness, it's so much better in real life," because textiles don't photograph well. It doesn't matter who photographs them. They're really difficult to photograph because of the depth and the tactile quality of them. So I think it's really important that you get out there and make contact with people. And, my experience is that you develop a sort of massive critical mass once you get to a certain level, and then people start getting in touch with you. So you're not contacting them, they're contacting you. But also, I think you have to be selective about what you decide to do, because people do look at your CV and they see what you've done. And they, if you've done some exhibitions that are good and, strong, then that speaks volumes for the quality of your work. So all the things that I learned in art college still apply, but it's a completely different field than it was when I graduated. It was so sort of analog, and now it's all digital.
There was such a change, wasn't there, when it went on particularly during lockdown.
Yes.
I know a lot of galleries, well, they had no choice but cancel exhibitions.
That's right. Yeah.
I think they then many of them swiveled and started to put on exhibitions online.
Yes.
But as you say, it's not quite the same. You don't get the tactile quality.
No.
You also actually don't get any idea of size of a piece.
No, that's right. Absolutely.
So I suppose do you think we've come back from that, or do you think we'll always keep some level of that digital gallery
I think it's probably just at the beginning of that, because of AI and because of what's coming down the track with all the new digital technologies, I imagine that that whole world will just expand even more. But for me, there's nothing that replaces actually seeing something in real life, and also
Mm.
just being in a gallery with people. I think I think it's like you could compare it to books and digital books. And it's great. Digital books are fantastic when you're on holiday. You don't want to be lugging a suitcase full of books around. But there's nothing like leafing through a book and seeing the page and feeling the paper. And so it's the same with galleries. I think the whole digital thing will just probably explode, but I think physical galleries will still thrive. I mean, you just need to look at the galleries' attendance figures for exhibitions, and people love going to galleries. They love
They
seeing artwork. They love being together and seeing artwork.
they do.
Yeah.
I think as well, obviously there's a geographical aspect to that. If you're close enough
Yes.
to go, that's great, isn't it? But of course, not everyone
Absolutely.
is.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned there the new digital technology that's
Yes.
coming along. You possibly have more experience than me, I don't know, but do you have any thoughts of what it might bring into the textiles world?
I don't really know from a textile point of view. It's more from being an author. I think the issue of I've just filled out a survey from one of the organizations that I belong to about AI, and it's really to do with copyright and privacy and things like that. So I think, you know, it's really important when you're a tutor and maker and an exhibitor that your work is copyrighted and safe, and I think it's become easier for people to see what you do because of the internet, which is a good thing. But the downside of that is that they look at it and think, oh, I can do that, so I will do it. And then they end up copying what you're doing. So I know a lot of artists are very conscious of that. And then AI just adds a whole other layer to that because they can just literally copy what you're doing immediately. And so there's probably some great benefits to AI, but I think it has to be regulated and it has to be used for artists' benefit, not to do them out of a job, if you see what I
Mm.
mean. So it's
I
challenging, as I would say it's challenging.
I would agree with you. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know a vast amount about it, but
No.
this week I was sent an email, I think it was from Google,
Yeah.
saying, "Try this out," and it was
Yeah.
a visual AI.
Yes.
So you type into the little box what you'd like,
Yeah.
and I think I put something silly like a red rose on
Yeah.
an indigo blue background with
Yeah.
radiation with a gold arrow through it, and back
Yeah.
it came.
Yeah. I
Exact
know.
exactly as I'd described.
I know.
Which is fairly scary.
It is. Yeah. But somebody still had to draw that.
Mm,
Even if AI put it together, the artist who drew that rose is still they still need to be credited and they need to be reimbursed or recompensed for doing that. So
mm.
that's my concern is that yes, it's very clever. It can put stuff together, but it's putting stuff together that other people have already created, other people's content. So that would be my concern really.
Absolutely. I mean, I have no idea where it's getting it from, but if
No.
you say it's getting it from somewhere, which is
Yeah.
quite a thought.
And are those people being, are they being told or are they just taking it? That's the worrying thing.
I should probably have gone on to the next step and downloaded it, which I didn't do.
Yeah.
Because it would have been interesting at that point, wouldn't it, to see if anybody was credited.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, it may be that they buy the rights and they don't credit people. And then once they've got the rights, that's their thing. But I'd be interested to know where the imagery that they use comes from because
Mm.
it's all stuff that somebody else has done.
Yes, I mean, it looked like a sort of almost a cartoon
Yeah.
drawing.
Yeah.
As opposed to something that but I mean, as you say, some at some point someone
Yeah.
had to originate that from
Yeah.
somewhere.
Absolutely.
I know that you were saying previously that it's great to look at people's work, to go out
Uh-huh.
and have a look at, obviously, exhibitions and what have you. But it is quite a fine line between being inspired by someone's
Yes.
work and copying someone's work.
Absolutely.
Do you have any sort of thoughts about how somebody would check themselves for that?
So I think the thing to ask yourself is this comes back to tutoring really. I think the thing that tutors need to ask is this person, are you enabling someone to create something original and unique, or are they just imitating or parroting what you're doing? Now, if you're just teaching them a technique, that's one thing. But if you're trying to get them to create an original piece of work, at some point they have to go back a step, and there have to be some design principles there, and there has to be some knowledge of design principles. It's not just a question of seeing something they like and saying, "Oh, I'll do that." So for me, it's going back to basics really, and I think that's where education really comes in, because unless you're prepared to, the number of women I teach who say I can't draw.
Oh,
So when you
yes.
give them a piece of tracing paper and you say, "Okay, you can't draw, but I'd just like you to trace this image, just simplify it. This is an image that you've chosen, a photograph. Let's just simplify it." So they then are drawing, but because it's not called drawing, they're okay with it. So
Mm,
I think the the key thing is to get people to really appreciate the value of design
yes.
and the amount of work that goes into designing and making, and also the amount of work that goes into designing and making a course. So, it doesn't just come out of the blue, out of thin air. The courses that I teach, they're all planned, they're trialed, there's samples done. It takes years to develop a course. So I think that shows when you see students work and you see that they've all done something original and that they've benefited from it, not
Mm.
just, you know, copied. But you're right, there is a very fine line, and it's sometimes it's difficult to see.
Yes, I think perhaps, unfortunately, the less experience someone has, the more difficult it is to see.
Yes.
As far as the teaching is concerned, I couldn't agree more with you. The
Yeah.
number of times that we have students they have no problem at all understanding that they need to learn a particular technique. They don't expect to know it. Why would they? But the same process, you need to learn how to design, sends them into a complete
Yes,
tailspin.
that's right. I think it's the word design or draw, or, you just have to phrase it slightly differently. Then
Do you
it's not
think it
so scary.
do you think it's to do with the art and design education at school, do you think?
Yes, definitely,
Mm,
definitely. And it's historical. I think, to be fair to art and design teachers now, they're under siege really, because they've had so many cuts, and there's so many courses have been cancelled, and it's really a difficult thing to do now. Whenever I go into schools, I love teaching adolescents, but I find the staff very demoralized a lot of the time because it's very, very hard work for lots of different reasons. But
mm,
what I think the people I'm talking about are people who were at school maybe, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago or more.
yeah.
And the teaching then wasn't as enlightened as it is now. And they were told that being an artist wasn't a sort of good career move. Or even a lot of the time they were told that they were too bright to go to art college, which I find
Mm,
really insulting.
yeah.
But also things like, "Oh, it's not a real job." But, it's the second biggest industry in the UK, the creative industries. So I've just seen today there's a big co sort of, advertising campaign by the Royal Academy about art education. I think we really need to value what we've got and not get rid of it. It's so important for people, and their point is it's important for everybody, not just people who decide to become artists.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen some figures, I think a couple of years ago, that were saying that at least half of people that come to art and craft
Yeah.
come because they have some sort
Mm.
of mental health issue.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
so that they're obviously using it as therapy.
Yeah.
And what we don't want to do is create a whole load of angst around it, do we?
No, absolutely. But also I think it's therapeutic for makers as well, because it's the way that they express themselves. And if
Mm.
they don't express themselves, then it's really hard, because that's their identity. So I think that needs to come through when you're teaching as well.
I think sometimes people feel that the population falls into two halves.
Yes.
The ones that are somehow naturally born with an artistic
Yes.
ability, and the
Yeah.
ones that can't,
Yes.
and on top of that can't learn it.
Yes, that's right. And I think it's as such a sort of depressing and sort of damaging attitude, that because everybody can learn and everybody can do it. It's just a question of having the right people teaching you, and a bit of confidence, and putting a bit of time into it. It's like anything, it's a skill. So, it's not like everybody's going to end up being super famous and super whatever, but that doesn't matter. That's not what it's about. It's about enjoying the process and making something that you love, and maybe making something for someone.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember many years ago, I was going through a divorce and quite a bad time personally.
Yeah.
And I was also completing my diploma,
Yeah.
the Girls diploma. I got behind because of everything that was going on.
Yeah.
I just sat to on that and, sort of got on with it.
Yes.
Time flew. It was the one thing that took me
Yeah.
completely out of myself, away
Yeah.
from my problems.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think if it can do that, then it's such a valuable thing, because there are very few things actually that can just take you away from your of course, you have to come
Absolutely.
back into them at some
Yeah.
point, but just to have some respite's a
Yeah.
wonderful thing.
No, absolutely. And I think, the great thing as well is that you don't have to have a special dedicated space to do it. It's very portable textile art. You can do it in a basket, or you can do it from a bag, or, it's something you can do when you're traveling, or when you've got a few minutes in the evening in front of the television, or, it's such a good, I don't know, it's a good all rounder, I think, for people.
It is. I mean, I must say that when I looked on your website, you have a lovely photograph of yourself in front of what looks to be a gorgeous studio.
Yeah.
So I'm
It's
assuming
just
that you have your own space.
yeah, I do. It's a shed, actually.
Mm.
It's glorified garden outbuilding, which has been renovated and stuff. But it is nice. It's not very big. So I always say to people, it's not the size of your space that counts, it's what you do. But it's lovely, yeah. It is nice to be able to go and work there and shut the door and just leave it when it's a mess, you know.
Oh, I'm sure. Just shut
Yeah,
the door on it all, yes.
exactly.
I think that must be very challenging to perhaps be in the position where you can only work on, say, the family dining table, and that
Oh
has
yeah,
to be cleared away before
absolutely.
everyone can come back and eat dinner. Um,
Absolutely. But people do, some people
they do.
do. So,
They do indeed.
yeah.
As far as enabling students to create something really unique, which I know we touched on earlier, what do you think the best way of tackling that is?
So I always say my two favorite words are sample and sketchbook. I think having a sketchbook, or as I call it, a collection, a book that you can put collections of things in that inspire you. So it doesn't have to be drawing in it. It could just be labels that you like from tins, or it could be, leaves that you've pressed, or, anything that inspires you. Stick it in the book so you've got it there to remind you.
Mhm.
And then sampling, I think, is so important. If you start with something, just do a little sample and see what you think. Try something maybe that you haven't done. Try a different technique, or a different, I don't know, different material, different media, something that you haven't done before,
Mhm.
and do a little sample and see what you think.
Yeah.
That's always the best.
Would you suggest that somebody has a design before they move on to that point, or is it just okay to go straight into sort of fabric and stitch?
I think if you do a small fabric piece, that could often can lead to something bigger. I think if you start small and just work your way, tread your way carefully, it's good to have a design if you want that. But if you're like me, sometimes the design comes as you're putting bits of fabric together and you're just being inspired with different pieces of fabric or different colors or different things that you've seen along the way.
And as far as the sketchbook format is concerned, we
Yeah.
we get very used to seeing some absolutely gorgeous sketchbooks,
Yeah.
don't we, online that are
Yeah.
effectively a work of art in themselves.
Yes.
Clearly, I would say, have not been put together to inform a piece of work. They
No.
have been assembled to look what they are, which is lovely.
Yes. Yes.
But they're not a work in progress. Or
No. And I think that's the thing. I think that it's kind of taking the pressure off yourself and letting yourself make mistakes and letting yourself not be perfect, because the perfection doesn't help. It doesn't help you improve and it doesn't help you achieve your goals. That's what I was saying before. Everybody has good and bad days. So take your time and do things that you want to do. Don't, try not to be too pressured by what you see around you, because that can be off putting too.
yes, especially when you're told sort of put a few sketches in a sketchbook, and then you
Yes.
Google sketchbooks and see some absolutely gorgeous
Yeah.
ones that.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm,
Absolutely.
mm. So, Anne, you clearly love to travel, and
Yeah.
you've been an artist in residence at some very interesting places. Can you tell us about how that works, in practice? Are
Yeah.
you invited, or how do
Yes.
you get to go to some of these great venues?
So I have my two residencies were in a beautiful garden in Sussex called Sussex Prairie Garden, and in Italy in a little town in the Italian Abruzzo area. And both of them I was approached by the organizers. So Sussex Prairies is a garden that's amazing, planting of wild sort of grasses and prairie plants in just near Brighton. It's really beautiful. And they have this program of having an artist in residence there every year that runs classes and sets up an installation. And I did it in 2014. It was really wonderful. We raised money for the Sussex Wildlife Trust, and we did a big exhibition, and we had lots of classes, and it's been documented in my book, Textile Nature, actually, the whole experience. It was brilliant. And then at the end of it, I had book launch of Textile Nature. So that was really wonderful. And I was invited by the owner to be the artist there. And it wasn't as, they didn't tell me what I needed to do, but I kind of developed a system because I don't live that close to it. It's about an hour's drive from me.
Mm.
So I think I worked out that I would be there once a week and I would do classes and things at weekends. So I did put quite a lot of time into it, and it was lovely. Lots of visitors, and they did a sort of community wall. So loads of different things happened from that.
Mm.
And there's so much there on your doorstep, nature-wise, so it was perfect, really.
Did you have nice weather when you were there?
Luckily, it was really nice, actually. And then they very kindly donated this shed because I was at the Knit and Stitch show the following year, or 2 years after that, actually, and they donated the shed to me, this sort of movable thing on wheels that I decorated there using some of the bits from the residency. So it went on for a while. It didn't just stop, which is nice when things continue. It's a nice
Mm.
feeling. So
Yes.
that was good. And then also I was in Italy in 2017, and that was amazing. So a lady who'd seen my work at the Knit and Stitch show invited me to this Farindola, this town in Abruzzo, and they'd always had artists there, but they'd never had a textile artist. So it was a bit of a learning curve for them.
Mm.
They had a very old hand crank Singer sewing machine, which was fun.
Mm.
But yeah, it was great. It was a really great opportunity. And it was what was so nice about that was I had 3 weeks of just working because we had a flat and, everybody shared in the cooking and there were other artists there. And you
Mhm.
could just literally spend all day, every day working, which is wonderful. So yeah, had a great time.
So were local people coming in to see you there?
Yes, we
Mm.
had we were part of the local festival, so we had an open studio event
Mm.
and they had a big cheese festival there because it's where pecorino cheese
Oh,
is
right.
from.
Yeah. Mhm.
So they had a big cheese festival with artists and things showing what they were doing. So it was great. And
And
then the work from my
mhm.
residency, quite a lot of it was shown at the Compton Verney Museum in Warwickshire
Mm.
the following year. So that was lovely too, for it to go out and be seen.
I was just going to ask, how's your Italian?
Oh, terrible. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. No Italian, but we got by.
Yes.
People are very generous. It was lovely.
Mm. Oh, good, good.
Yeah.
And sort of, I know obviously that you have quite a number of books which are
Yes.
absolutely glorious.
Thank you.
Do you have anything that's coming up, as in another book or a new
Yes.
exhibition that you could tell us about?
Yes. So I've got another book coming out next year in next September or October, I think, possibly, with Baxford again. And it's called Abstract Textiles. And I'm very excited about it because it's quite a departure from my other books, but it's also a link from my other books. So it's sort of bridging the gap from doing representational narrative work to more abstract work, which a lot of people do. And a lot of people like me use abstraction in their work, but you wouldn't call my work abstract. So backgrounds and things can
Mm.
be abstract. So I'm quite excited about it. There's a lot of work in it about studios and making ink and making brushes and things like that. So I think it'll be
Mm.
quite fun. Mixed media.
If you could choose anything, what would be your favourite techniques? Because you do span quite a few, don't you?
Uh-huh. Well, I think I trained when I did fine art, I trained as a printmaker and photographer. And I think for me, printmaking there's always an element of printmaking in my work. And I just love the way that print works on fabric. It's very different to working on paper, but it works so well. The ink takes so well, or the paint takes so well on fabric. So for me, I suppose that's my favorite. I love that. It just is sometimes quite subtle, but I think it works really well.
Mm. I was just going to ask what sort of printing methods you use.
So I use quite a few. I use screen printing, I use block printing, I use transfer printing sometimes as well. So it just depends, digital print. It just depends on what I'm doing, what the project is.
Because for some of those methods, you think of them being employed actually in an art college environment where there's
Yes.
big print tables, lots of
Yes.
room to store large screens
Yeah.
and to wash them. And
Yeah.
so, do you manage to do that in your
Yes.
studio? You do.
So the thing is, all of those techniques you can do in a small space. I mean, the digital print has to be done by someone else, but you can still use it.
Mm.
But screen printing, my screen is probably A4 size, so it's small,
Mm.
but I still think it's lovely. I love stencils and screens. Block prints are really easy to use in a small space because they're very portable, and I often take them on courses for people to have a play with. They love them as well.
The next thing I think I was going to ask was if you have any advice for our students when they get to the point that they are perhaps stuck for inspiration. We all get to that point sometimes, don't we? That we're trying to think. I think actually, if there's pressure applied as well, as there sometimes is, of course, with the City and Guilds course,
Yeah.
to come up with something. And it's very easy to just come to a dead halt and block. Do you
Yeah.
have any advice for them to get out of that
Yes.
stalemate? Oh, good.
So I always work on more than one piece at a time. I think if you have two or three, I always use a bit of a baking analogy and say that, if you've got all the ingredients out, you may as well do more than one. And I think if you work on more than one piece at a time, then you're more likely to be happy with something that comes through because you're not investing everything in one thing. We tend to always think we have to just do one and it has to be perfect. And that's one of the first things I say to people when I'm teaching is treat it like a sampler. Don't put everything, you will make another one. This isn't the only thing you're ever going to make. Because I think we put the pressure on ourselves, and the secret is to keep everything as open ended as possible. So I like to use techniques as well that aren't so confining. I love traditional applique, I love traditional patchwork, but it's not for me because it's too prescriptive. It defines what you're doing too soon. I like being able to change things, add things, take things away. So look for techniques maybe that give you that freedom and give you a little bit of space to create, because sometimes things change as you progress with them. They don't always look the same at the beginning as they do at the end, or as you thought they might.
Yes, I think that's really good advice, particularly the bit about trying more than one.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, I did go to art school. I went to sort of not a formal art school, but, they were very structured classes.
Yes.
And we were just told, do it. We might be given a time,
Yes.
10 minutes, get on and draw something. And we knew that we would be drawing a lot that day.
Yes.
We would use the best of what we had at the end of it.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people that are just starting out, that haven't had that training, don't perhaps fully appreciate that actually you do need to have more than one idea, more than one sketch.
Yes.
You do a lot, you produce a lot,
Yes.
and then you pick the best, don't you?
Absolutely. And I also think, use materials that you like. We always tend to save things and say, I can't use this because it's the best bit. I need to save it. But what are you saving it for, really?
Yes.
If you use something that you love, then you'll love the stitching. It'll be successful. If you use things that you're just trying to get rid of or you're not happy with, it's going to make your job harder. So do things that make it easy for you and enjoyable. And I always think stitching should be enjoyable. Otherwise, what are we doing, really?
Yes, there's a really no point otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I always think people roughly fit into two camps with that.
Yeah.
The ones that do it, they don't really care too much about the end result, but they love the process.
Yes.
And the ones that rush through the process to get to the end result.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
As far as working to commission,
Yes.
do you do that?
Yes, I do. And I really enjoy it. And
Do you?
I do, because I think it's such a collaboration, isn't it, between you and the person who's commissioning. And I think a lot of people don't like it, but I assume when somebody commissions me that they've looked at my work and they like my style. So it's a way of working in my style, but maybe creating something really special for somebody. And I have really enjoyed doing commissions for people, definitely.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is unusual because I know often when I speak to people,
Yeah.
to different artists, they prefer not to really,
Yes.
ideally,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want to do it all the time, but I do enjoy it. When it comes up, I always feel it's a real privilege because somebody's looked at your work and thought they really love it and they want something
Mm.
done in that style. And yeah, it's great.
So how does the process work? Do they give you a commission and then
Yeah.
is it staged that you go back and show
Yeah.
them something?
So what I tend to do when somebody wants a commission is I make them write a wish list of everything that they want on that piece, and also the size, the colors, anything special that they want on it. And then we discuss it and we have a sort of to and fro about it. And then I usually do like a sketch or a design for them and maybe a sample for them to see before I start making.
Mhm.
Because there's nothing worse than making something and then someone saying, actually, that's not what I wanted. So it's communication, isn't it? It's communicating with people and getting them to sign off on what you're doing. I
Yeah.
always ask for, just on a practical level, I always ask for a 50% deposit because the amount of work involved is huge, and
Yeah.
even if, I don't think I've ever had a case when people haven't been happy, but I can imagine that there could be a situation where there's a miscommunication or something. I think that's maybe what frightens people a bit. But generally speaking, because people know my style, they know what I'm doing and they like it, it's usually really pleasurable and fun.
Mm. You've never got to the point where you've wanted to keep what you've made?
Not really, because it's always been made with someone else in mind. So it's not really, I'm not that as possessive really about those pieces of work.
Do you ever borrow them back to do
I
exhibitions with?
do, yes, I have done. Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. Just to show people what's possible,
Mm.
definitely.
Mm.
And they're in some of my books as well, which is nice.
Yes, I'm sure. I mean, you just sort of to return to the books for a little while,
Yes,
that must be a heck of a process. I mean,
it
how do
is.
you go about originating a whole book?
So it's a 3-year process for every book, really, because
Gosh.
the first year is the the book proposal, and then doing the research and asking people, because in my books I like to have lots of contributors because I feel that it gives people a bit of depth. I love my own work, but I also love seeing other people's take on things, and I think it's helpful to people when they look at them to see other examples. So it's a big process. You have to get everything organized. And then the second year is writing, photographing, arranging rights if you have to borrow pictures. And then the third year is really editing. So that's the stage we're at the moment with this other book.
So do the book projects overlap? I mean, so would
No,
you no,
they don't
you
really.
just do them from beginning to
Yeah.
end? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's enough working on one at a time, but
Yes,
they
I
have
can
been
imagine.
fairly sequential, which is nice. And I think they include projects that and themes that are very personal to me, even though it's not all they're not all my work is about that theme, but they're
Mm.
elements of that theme. So that's what I hope people get from them, is they get a sense of being able to share those themes and get ideas really and inspiration.
Are you aiming them at a particular market, in that are you looking at somebody who would have some basic knowledge within the area and would use these to go on to improve their work? Do you have a person in mind when you're writing them?
I think they're aimed at anybody who's interested in textiles, really, and what if they're looking for inspiration and looking for ideas. So it could be a student, it could be somebody who's, just a practitioner on their own, it could be an older person. I've had comments from people of all ages about them. So I can't really say it's one specific demographic, but, I hope they appeal to lots of different people at different stages.
So they're intended really as an inspirational aid.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, there are workshops in them in every book, and there's quite a few examples of samples and things like that. But they're not how-to books in the sense that they're just kits that you can buy. They're
Mm.
meant to spark inspiration from the reader as well, which is the way I teach. So I suppose it's the same thing, but
Mm.
in a book form.
And is some of the work from your students that's included with them?
Yes,
Mm.
definitely.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
And presumably they feel very flattered that they've been included.
I think they love it. Yeah, I think
Yeah, I
they
bet
really
they do.
enjoy it. Yeah,
I bet they do.
yeah,
So I think really, Anne, I know that we're kind of probably approaching the end of our
yeah.
chat, but is there anything that comes next? What is it that you would like to maybe move on to? More of the same or
Right.
something different?
So just to let you know, I've got a really big exhibition in Japan next month,
Ah,
which is the Japanese Quilt Guild asked me to send. I think it's 15 to 20 pieces, and that's going to be exhibited at the World Quilt Festival in Yokohama, which is lovely. Unfortunately, I can't go, but
oh,
somebody's taking pictures and videos for me, which is great.
Mhm.
So I'm really excited about that. And then I had a piece of work accepted into the Broders exhibition, which is a really prestigious exhibition in London in March. So I'm thrilled about that. And I am working towards an exhibition in Canada in 26, which is quite a big thing, a big solo exhibition. So
Mm.
I'm there's lots on the lots on the horizon.
There's lots on the go,
Yeah,
isn't there?
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
how on earth do you manage your time to deal with it all?
Well, I think, being freelance, what you have to do is you have to give days up for certain things. So this week I'm going to have to do my tax return.
Oh,
So that
that's a
will take,
downer, isn't
yeah,
it?
that will take probably half a day to get everything ready for my accountant. It's all that kind of thing. So
Mm,
you have to segment your life up and be very organized, and that's hard sometimes because life gets in the way. You can't predict things. I've
yeah.
got a family and I'm a grandmother, so I'm busy with that as well. So I
Mm,
think, if I could have a day or two in the studio every week, I'm really happy because
yeah,
that's a major achievement.
yeah.
But prep for classes and writing and everything, it all takes time. So I like to split my time with things and then also see family and friends and all the things that everyone else does. So,
I think as well, people always underestimate, I think, with a business,
yes.
just how much time, because it
Yeah,
is a business
it
essentially,
is.
and
Absolutely.
it's how much time it takes, not actually doing what you
No,
the
no,
main part of it,
absolutely.
what you would
Yeah.
like to do. But as you
Yeah.
say, things like tax, things like accounts, things like
Yeah.
promotion, arranging,
Yeah.
corresponding with galleries, all
Yeah.
that sort of thing. It takes time, doesn't it?
It does. And I think, I'm fortunate that I have the time to do things, but I do quite guard my making time quite jealously because I think if you don't have that time, you can't really if you don't give yourself time to do it, you can't give other people your time.
Mm.
You need that reinforcement of what you do and what you enjoy doing as well.
So do you block out areas
I
and say,
do.
"No, that's not that's absolutely sacrosanct. I go
I
into my
do because
studio
I
and I
could,
work."
yeah, I mean, I could teach probably every week of the year if I wanted to. And that's too much, you can't, you don't, you end up becoming not as good as you could be. You want to do, this time of year is very, very busy. I always find the autumn and the spring are
Mm.
the two busiest times. But the rest of the year, I try and space things out a bit. So I've got a bit of time to do other things and to get on top of my own practice.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out. What I know is obviously a very busy
Yeah.
life to chat with me today. I really appreciate it, and it's been a complete pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Gail. It's been lovely talking to you as well.